I'd like to take a minute and talk about Noah's Ark. This is because a couple of reasons. First of all, I've always been fascinated by the Noah's Ark story, but also with the movie coming out, it's got it going in my mind again, obviously. When you look at the Bible and you read the Noah's Ark story, what you see is, first of all, it's very short. You probably know most of it off by heart without even trying. But secondly, and I didn't realize this till later, parts of it don't really make sense until you know the historical context with which the Bible was collected, which is ancient Mesopotamia. But let's start off with how Noah's Ark starts. It starts with all the people of the earth being very numerous and also being really hot. So hot that the angels up above said, "Wow, those women look good." And they came down and had children with women. In many translations of the Bible, this is described as the angels having children that were giants with earth women, and those giants being the heroes of ancient legends. Some Bibles use different words and get very specific with how they word it, but that's actually what seems to be going on there. And God looked down and saw, first of all, many different people, and secondly, these giants, which were the children of the consorting between human women and angels, and said, "I don't think this is going very well." He declared that the human experiment was over and a failure, and he was going to flood everyone. And then very suddenly it says, but he really liked Noah. To understand why this is perhaps not the most straightforward story, let's look at the tale of Atra-Hasis from ancient Mesopotamia. In the story of Atra-Hasis, we have much the same situation going on. The humans, just as a way of backgrounder, were created to do the work of the gods, to plow the fields, to raise the cattle, to sacrifice them in a way appropriate for good eatings, and the priests would bring it and lay it at the feet of the statues of those gods in the temples. So you could be forgiven for thinking that the actual stone statues were supposed to eat the food that was being grown throughout the Mesopotamian Empire. When the food was brought there, the priests probably took a little bit of their cut. But the point is, that was what humans were on Earth to do. But as the humans were very numerous, they were also very noisy. This is a recurring theme. Silence and noise thematically are used throughout Mesopotamian mythology. And the gods were a little unsettled by this. And they decided, you know what? We're just going to use the flood weapon and destroy the entire human race. I thought it was very interesting in the translation that I read that they called it the flood weapon. That's how the translation was rendered. So when they decided to use the flood weapon in the council of the gods, one of the gods said, I'm not so sure that this is a great idea. And he went and talked to the human that he was most close with. This god was the god of wisdom. He was the wisest of the gods. And everyone else was going in a different direction. And he decided to say, hey, Atra-Hasis, why don't you build an ark, gather a bunch of animals in it, and you and your family go on a cruise, which is exactly what happened. Back in the tale of Noah's Ark, God does the same thing. God seems a little two-minded. He says, I'm going to destroy all life on earth, and then turns around and saves Noah and his family. It makes more sense if you realize that this book was collected at a time when the flood myth was already in circulation in Babylon at the time, and that there might have been some drawing and borrowing from other traditions. But when they did this, they had to make it about one monogod, monotheistic religion, instead of being about a bunch of different gods. God said, Noah, I want you to build an ark make it this big by that big, and take two of every this kind of animal and seven of every that kind of animal in different chapters. He repeats himself and adding different information each time. It's a little scattered and all over the place. But it happens. The floods come. All the humans die except for Noah's family. And they, as you know, as the story goes, float away on their ark for a number of days until Noah gets signs that the flood waters have gone away. You'd think you'd get the idea because the boat would stop rocking, but whatever. In the story of Atra-Hasis, what happens next is really interesting. Atra-Hasis gets off the boat, and by this point, the other gods realize their mistake. There's no one to raise their livestock, there's no one to grow their food, and there's no one to prepare their food for them. So by this point, they're all starving and hungry and cursing their lack of foresight. To which the wise god goes up to the council and says, well, I happen to have this guy I know. They are immediately intrigued after a little bit of snarkiness. Atra-Hasis gets off the boat, kills one of the animals, and barbecues it up. At this point, the other gods come down, smell the smell, eat the flesh, and live happily ever after, realizing their mistake of creating the flood in the first place. In the story of Noah's Ark, you have something far too similar happening. Noah gets off of the boat, barbecues up some animal, and God comes down and smells the aroma. And you really get the feeling that he's really excited about this barbecue. And then he says, I will make a covenant with you. I will never destroy the entire world again by flood, and I will make a rainbow as a sign of this covenant, of this agreement with you. All of a sudden, God is seeming like it was a mistake to have flooded everything, although that is never actually discussed in the text, and that he's sorry that he did it, and he promises never to do it again. I understand why the Mesopotamian gods did that, because they needed the humans to do their work. What I don't understand is why the God of the Bible all of a sudden started acting like he had made the biggest blunder. Of course, part of the reason is that both of these stories were in the city of Babylon, where the Bible was put together. And so there was, of course, some cultural cross-contamination. But I think the differences and the similarities between the two stories are really interesting, and I hope you did too.